The amber sun dipped below the horizon as Winifred Matthews stared at the darkening prairie, fear gripping her heart like a vice. She had ventured too far, chasing the promise of dry wood for the cooking fire, and now the vast Kansas landscape stretched endlessly before her, each golden wave of grass indistinguishable from the next. The year was 1878, and being alone on the prairie at nightfall was as good as a death sentence for a city-bred woman like herself. Winifred pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the spring evening bringing a chill that seeped through her calico dress. At 22, she had imagined her move west would bring adventure, not this paralyzing terror as darkness swallowed the land. Her brown boots were caked with prairie mud, her hands raw from clutching the small bundle of kindling she'd managed to gather before realizing she was hopelessly lost. "Keep the river to your right, Winnie," she muttered to herself, recalling her father's advice for navigation. But which direction was the river now? The gentle slope of the land all looked the same, the distant trees mere silhouettes against the deepening blue sky. A coyote's howl pierced the evening air, sending a shudder down her spine. Winnie forced herself to keep walking, though each step felt heavier than the last. Her honey-blonde hair had come loose from its pins, whipping across her face in the rising wind. The small homestead where she had been staying with her cousin's family had to be somewhere, but in which direction? Miles away, on his sprawling cattle ranch, Heath Blackwell was preparing to check his herd one last time before turning in for the night. At 30, Heath had established himself as one of the more successful ranchers in the county. Standing over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders from years of hard labor, he cut an impressive figure against the twilight sky. His dark brown hair curled slightly where it met the collar of his worn leather vest, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his tanned face. "Something ain't right," he said to no one in particular, his deep voice carrying only to his faithful cattle dog, Rusty. The animal perked up its ears, sensing his master's unease. Heath had lived on the prairie long enough to develop an instinct for trouble, and tonight, something was pulling at him, urging him back out into the gathering darkness. He glanced up at the stars beginning to wink into existence above him. A storm was brewing on the distant horizon, the kind that could appear suddenly and turn deadly on these open plains. If any of his cattle had wandered too far, they'd need to be brought in before the weather turned. Heath saddled his chestnut stallion, Thunderbolt, and grabbed a lantern, lighting it with practiced ease. "Come on, boy," he called to Rusty, who bounded eagerly ahead as Heath swung into the saddle. The horse's muscles tensed beneath him, ready for action despite the late hour. As he rode out past the boundaries of his property, Heath couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't searching for stray cattle tonight. The wind carried whispers across the tall grass, and he followed them, guided by an instinct he'd learned never to ignore. Winnie stumbled for what felt like the 100th time, her foot catching on a hidden prairie dog hole. She fell hard, the breath knocked from her lungs as she hit the ground. The kindling she'd gathered scattered across the ground, lost in the darkness. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Crying wouldn't help her situation. "Get up, Winifred," she commanded herself, pushing to her feet and brushing dirt from her skirts. The darkness was almost complete now, the moon not yet risen high enough to illuminate the landscape. In the distance, she thought she could hear the low rumble of thunder, a sound that sent her heart racing even faster. Her thoughts turned to the small family she was staying with. Her cousin Jane would be worried by now, perhaps even sending her husband Robert out to search. But would they know which direction to look? Winnie had told no one where she was headed when she left to gather wood, thinking it would be a quick errand before supper. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Winnie shivered, knowing that getting soaked on the open prairie could be deadly, even in spring. Hypothermia was a silent killer out here, where help could be hours or even days away. She forced her tired legs to keep moving, hoping to find a landmark, a tree, anything that might offer shelter or a clue to her whereabouts. Heath had been riding for nearly an hour when Rusty suddenly stopped, nose to the ground, then barked sharply. The dog took off at a run, and Heath urged Thunderbolt to follow. The lantern swung from his hand, casting long shadows across the waving grass. In the distance, he thought he could make out a figure, small and hunched against the wind. "Hello," he called, his voice carrying across the open space. Winnie froze at the sound of a human voice. Was her mind playing tricks on her? She turned slowly, squinting into the darkness, and then she saw the bobbing glow of a lantern moving toward her across the prairie. Relief flooded through her body so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. "Help!" she cried out, her voice cracking. "Please, I'm lost." As the rider drew closer, Winnie could make out the silhouette of a man on horseback. In the golden glow of the lantern, she saw a ruggedly handsome face peering down at her with concern, a cattle dog circling excitedly at the horse's feet. Heath held the lantern higher, illuminating the woman before him. Her clothes were dirty, her hair windblown, and her blue eyes wide with fear and relief. She was beautiful, even in her disheveled state, with delicate features and a determined set to her jaw that suggested she wasn't one to give up easily. "Miss, are you hurt?" Heath asked, dismounting in one fluid motion. He kept a respectful distance, not wanting to frighten her further. "No, just lost," Winnie replied, her voice steadier now. "I was gathering wood and wandered too far. I'm staying with my cousin's family, the Sawyers." Their homestead is about 5 miles east of town. Heath nodded, recognizing the name. "Robert Sawyer and his wife? They're good folk. You're a fair piece from their place now, though? About 3 miles southwest, if I reckon correctly." Relief washed over Winnie's face. "Thank goodness. I was beginning to think I'd wander this prairie until—" She trailed off, not wanting to voice her darker fears. "Until the storm hit." Heath finished for her, glancing at the horizon. "It's coming fast. We need to get you somewhere safe." He hesitated, calculating distances and time. "The Sawyers' place is too far with that weather moving in. My ranch is closer. We can shelter there until it passes, then I'll get you home." Winnie bit her lip, considering her options. Her cousin had warned her about the dangers of the frontier, including the risks a woman faced alone with a strange man. But the alternative was braving a prairie storm alone, and the dark clouds rolling in made that choice unthinkable. "I'd be grateful for your help, mister." She left the question hanging. "Blackwell. Heath Blackwell," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "And you'd be?" "Winifred Matthews." "Most call me Winnie." She offered a small smile, the first since she'd realized she was lost. Heath nodded and extended his hand to help her onto his horse. "Well, Miss Matthews, let's get you to safety before this sky opens up on us." Winnie hesitated only briefly before accepting his hand. His grip was strong and sure as he helped her up. She settled behind him on Thunderbolt's back, unsure where to place her hands. "You'll want to hold on," Heath advised as the first drops of rain began to fall. "Thunderbolt's steady, but it's going to be a fast ride." Tentatively, Winnie placed her hands on his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his jacket. As the horse broke into a gallop, she found herself holding tighter, grateful for the steady presence of the man before her as they raced the approaching storm across the darkened prairie. The rain was falling in earnest by the time Heath's ranch house came into view. It was larger than Winnie had expected, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide front porch and smoke curling from the stone chimney. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and a large barn stood nearby, its doors securely closed against the weather. Heath guided Thunderbolt directly to the barn, not wanting to leave his mount exposed to the elements any longer than necessary. Once inside, he dismounted quickly and turned to help Winnie down. Her skirts were soaked, her hair plastered to her head, and she was shivering visibly. "Let's get you inside where it's warm," Heath said, setting the lantern on a hook and quickly tending to his horse. His movements were efficient as he removed the saddle and gave Thunderbolt a quick rub-down, promising a more thorough grooming later. Rusty shook himself vigorously, spraying water droplets across the barn floor, then looked up at his master expectantly. Heath gave the dog an affectionate pat before leading the way to the house, holding the lantern high to light their path through the downpour. The ranch house was warm and welcoming, with a fire crackling in the hearth of the main room. Winnie stood just inside the door, conscious of the puddle forming around her boots on the polished wooden floor. "I'm afraid I'm making a mess," she said apologetically. Heath shook his head. "Nothing that won't dry. Come closer to the fire before you catch your death." He hung his dripping hat on a peg by the door and shrugged out of his wet jacket. "Wait here. I'll find something dry for you to change into." While Heath disappeared upstairs, Winnie took the opportunity to look around the room. It was comfortably furnished, with a large leather armchair and a sofa positioned near the fireplace. A bookshelf stood against one wall, surprisingly well stocked for a cattle rancher. The mantel held a few photographs and a beautiful hand-carved wooden box. It was clear that Heath Blackwell was no ordinary cowboy. This was the home of a man of substance and education. Heath returned carrying a folded stack of clothing. "These belonged to my sister when she stayed here last summer," he explained. "They might be a bit large, but they're dry." He pointed to a door off the main room. "You can change in there. It's my study, but it's private." Winnie took the clothes gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. You've been more than kind." "Heath," he corrected with a small smile. "Mr. Blackwell was my father." "And you're welcome, Miss Matthews." "Winnie," she replied, returning his smile before disappearing into the study. The clothes were simple, a plain blue dress that was indeed a bit loose on her smaller frame, but clean and dry. Winnie changed quickly, using a small towel Heath had included to dry her hair as best she could. She emerged from the study feeling considerably better, though still aware of the awkwardness of her situation. Heath had been busy while she changed. A kettle steamed on the stove in the adjacent kitchen, and he was laying out cups for tea. He had changed as well, into a clean shirt and dry trousers. His hair still damp, but combed back from his face. "Feel better?" he asked, glancing up as she entered the room. "Much, thank you." Winnie moved closer to the fire, extending her hands toward its warmth. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found me." Heath poured hot water into the teapot. "What were you doing out so far from the Sawyer's place?" The Prairie's no place for a city woman to be wandering alone, especially with nightfall coming. Winnie bristled slightly at his tone. "I wasn't wandering. I was gathering kindling for the cooking fire. Jane, my cousin, has been ill, and I wanted to help. I simply misjudged the distance." "Easy to do when you're not used to the open country," Heath conceded, his voice softening. "Even those born to it can get turned around sometimes, especially when the weather changes." He brought her a cup of tea, which she accepted gratefully. Outside, the storm had intensified, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rolling across the sky. Winnie jumped slightly at a particularly loud crash. "We're safe here," Heath assured her, taking a seat in the armchair across from her. "House has weathered worse storms than this." He studied her over the rim of his cup. "Where are you from originally, if you don't mind my asking?" "Boston," Winnie replied. "I came west 3 months ago, after my father passed. I had no other family back east, and Jane wrote that I might find opportunities here." "I'm sorry about your father," Heath said sincerely. "It's not easy losing family." Winnie nodded, touched by his understanding. "Thank you. It's been difficult, but I'm trying to make a new start." She sipped her tea, finding comfort in its warmth. "What about you? Have you always lived here?" Heath leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Born in Missouri, but my family moved here when I was 10. Father built this place from nothing." A shadow crossed his face. "Lost both my parents to influenza 6 years ago. My sister married and moved to California, so it's just me now, running the ranch." "It's a beautiful home," Winnie said softly. "You've done well with it." A small, proud smile tugged at Heath's lips. "Try to. It's hard work, but it's good land." They fell into comfortable conversation as the storm raged outside, discovering shared interests in literature and music. Heath was surprised to learn Winnie had taught school in Boston, while she was intrigued by his knowledge of astronomy, a hobby he'd developed during long nights watching over his herds. "The stars are clearer here than anywhere I've ever seen," Winnie admitted. "In Boston, the city lights and smoke obscure much of the sky." "That's one thing the Prairie gives freely," Heath agreed. "On clear nights, it feels like you could reach up and touch them." As the hour grew late, Heath showed Winnie to a guest room upstairs. "Get some rest," he said, lighting a lamp beside the bed. "Hopefully the storm will pass by morning, and I can take you back to your cousins." Winnie stood in the doorway, suddenly reluctant to end their conversation. "Thank you again, Heath. I don't know many men who would have ridden out in the dark like that." He shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said with certainty. "Not anyone." Their eyes met for a long moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Heath cleared his throat. "Well, good night then, Winnie. Sleep well." "Good night," she replied softly, watching as he retreated down the hallway before closing her door. Despite her exhaustion, Winnie lay awake for some time, listening to the storm gradually subside and thinking about the man who had saved her. There was something about Heath Blackwell that intrigued her, a complexity beneath his rugged exterior that she found herself wanting to understand better. When morning came, Winnie woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains of the guest room. For a moment, she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then the events of the previous evening came flooding back, and she sat up quickly. Through the window, she could see that the storm had passed, leaving the prairie washed clean and glittering with dew in the early light. She rose and dressed in her own clothes, now dry after being hung by the fire overnight. The house was quiet as she made her way downstairs, but a delicious aroma wafted from the kitchen. She found Heath at the stove, cooking breakfast. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "Hope you're hungry. I'm afraid my cooking isn't fancy, but it'll keep you going." "It smells wonderful," Winnie assured him, surprised to find a competent bachelor. "Can I help with anything? You could pour the coffee if you like. Cups are in that cabinet." They worked together comfortably, setting the table and bringing the food over. Heath had prepared a hearty meal of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, simple but filling fare that reminded Winnie she hadn't eaten since midday yesterday. "I was thinking," Heath said as they sat down to eat, "that after breakfast I could take you to see something before heading back to your cousin's place. If you're willing, that is." Curiosity piqued, Winnie nodded. "What did you have in mind?" "It's a surprise," he replied with a cryptic smile. "But I think you'll like it." After breakfast, they set out on horseback, Heath leading the way across his property. Winnie rode side saddle on a gentle mare named Pepper, following Heath and Thunderbolt at a leisurely pace. The morning air was fresh and cool after the rain, the prairie vibrant with life and color. "Your land is beautiful," Winnie observed as they crested a small rise. The golden grass stretched out before them, dotted with wildflowers that had sprung up overnight, their faces turned toward the sun. "Wait until you see what's ahead," Heath called back over his shoulder. They rode for about 20 minutes before Heath reined in his horse and dismounted. They had reached a small copse of trees surrounding a clear spring, a hidden oasis in the middle of the prairie. Wildflowers grew in abundance here, creating a natural garden of purple, yellow, and white blooms. "Oh," Winnie exclaimed as Heath helped her down from her horse. "It's lovely." "My mother planted some of these flowers," Heath explained, leading her closer to the spring. "The rest just seemed to know they were welcome here. It's my favorite spot on the whole ranch." Winnie knelt to examine a cluster of delicate blue flowers. "We had nothing like this in Boston, just manicured garden beds and park lawns. This is wild and perfect." Heath watched her, pleased by her reaction. "I thought you might appreciate it. Most folks just see the prairie as empty space to be tamed. They miss all this." "I don't see how anyone could miss it," Winnie said, rising to her feet. "Thank you for showing me." Their eyes met again, and this time the connection lingered. Heath took a step closer, then seemed to catch himself, glancing away. "We should probably head to your cousin's soon. They'll be worried sick about you." Winnie nodded, though she felt a twinge of disappointment at the thought of leaving. "Yes, of course." The ride to the Sawyer homestead took just under an hour. As they approached, Winnie could see her cousin Jane standing in the doorway, shielding her eyes against the sun. When she spotted the riders, Jane called into the house, and Robert came running out, rifle in hand. "It's all right," Winnie called out, waving. "I'm fine." The reunion was emotional, with Jane embracing Winnie tightly, while Robert shook Heath's hand gratefully. "We were about to organize a search party," Robert explained. "After that storm hit, we feared the worst. Mr. Blackwell found me just in time," Winnie explained. "He offered shelter at his ranch until the storm passed." "We're in your debt, Blackwell," Robert said sincerely. "Anything we can do to repay you, you just name it." Heath shook his head. "No need for that. I'm just glad Miss Matthews is safe." Jane insisted Heath stay for lunch, and despite his protests that he had work waiting, he eventually agreed. As they ate, Winnie couldn't help noticing how often her eyes strayed to Heath, and how frequently she found him looking at her in return. After the meal, Heath prepared to leave, thanking the Sawyers for their hospitality. Winnie walked with him to where Thunderbolt was tethered outside. "Will I see you again?" she asked before she could stop herself. Heath hesitated, his hand on the saddle. Would you like to? Yes, Winnie answered honestly. Very much. A slow smile spread across Heath's face. The town's having a social on Saturday. Maybe you'd consider attending? I could meet you there. Winnie returned his smile, warmth spreading through her chest. I'd like that, Heath. He mounted his horse and tipped his hat to her. Saturday, then. Take care, Winnie, and maybe stay a bit closer to home when gathering kindling. She laughed, watching as he rode away, the prairie sun glinting off his dark hair. Only when he was a distant figure on the horizon did she turn back to the house, already counting the days until Saturday. The town social was held in the community hall, a simple wooden structure that served as church, meeting place, and dance hall, depending on the occasion. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the gathering. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, while tables laden with food lined the opposite wall. Winnie arrived with the Sawyers, wearing her best dress, a pale yellow creation that Jane had helped her alter to fit the current frontier fashion. Her hair was arranged in soft curls, pinned up with a few tendrils framing her face. She scanned the room nervously, searching for Heath among the crowd. Looking for someone? Jane asked with a knowing smile. Winnie felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who knows you well, her cousin assured her. And speaking of which, your cowboy just walked in. Winnie turned to see Heath entering the hall, and her heart skipped a beat. He'd cleaned up considerably, wearing a crisp white shirt and dark waistcoat. His usual trail, dust nowhere to be seen. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his stubble to a clean line along his jaw. He looked handsome and somewhat uncomfortable, clearly not accustomed to such social gatherings. Their eyes met across the room, and his serious expression melted into a warm smile that made Winnie's pulse quicken. He made his way toward her, nodding politely to those who greeted him along the way. Good evening, Winnie, he said when he reached her, his deep voice pitched just for her ears. You look beautiful. Thank you, she replied, suddenly shy. You clean up rather well yourself. Heath chuckled. Don't get used to it. These fancy duds only come out on special occasions. And what makes this occasion special? Winnie asked boldly. His eyes held hers. The company. The evening passed in a pleasant blur for Winnie. Heath introduced her to several of his neighbors and friends, all curious about the Eastern woman who had caught the attention of the normally solitary rancher. They danced together, Heath proving to be surprisingly graceful despite his initial protests that he had 2 left feet. During a break in the music, they stepped outside for some fresh air. The spring night was mild, stars twinkling overhead in a vast canopy of black velvet. I never tire of this view, Winnie said, gazing upward. Heath stood close beside her, his arm barely brushing against hers. Nor do I, though I find my attention drawn elsewhere tonight. Winnie turned to find him looking not at the stars, but at her. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Heath, I know we've only just met, he said quietly, but I feel like I've known you much longer. Is that strange? She shook her head. No, I feel it too. Heath took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. Would you consider coming out to the ranch tomorrow? For dinner, perhaps? I'd like to show you more of the place in daylight. I'd love to, Winnie replied without hesitation. The rest of the evening passed with a new awareness between them, a sense of possibility that had both excited and terrified Winnie. When Heath escorted her and the Sawyers back to their wagon at the end of the night, he held her hand a moment longer than necessary while helping her up. Until tomorrow, he said softly. Winnie nodded, unwilling to release his hand. Tomorrow. The following weeks saw Winnie and Heath spending increasingly more time together. He would ride over to the Sawyers' homestead in the evenings after his work was done, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, wildflowers from the spring, once even a kitten he'd rescued from a barn owl. Winnie found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. She had come west seeking a new beginning, not expecting to find a man who made her heart race with just a smile. On a particularly beautiful June day, Heath arrived at the Sawyers with a picnic basket and a plan. I thought we might ride out to the ridge today, he suggested. The view is spectacular, and the wildflowers are at their peak. Winnie agreed eagerly, and soon they were riding side by side across the prairie, the summer sun warm on their backs. Heath had packed a generous lunch: fried chicken, cornbread, and fresh berries he'd gathered himself that morning. They spread a blanket in a sheltered spot overlooking the valley below, where they could see for miles across the undulating grassland. As they ate, Heath spoke of his dreams for the ranch, expanding the herd, building a larger barn, perhaps planting an orchard near the house. "It sounds like you have it all planned out," Winnie observed, watching the animation in his face as he described his vision. Heath nodded, then hesitated. "Almost all of it. There's one piece missing, though." "What's that?" He looked at her directly, his expression suddenly vulnerable. "Someone to share it with." Winnie's heart pounded in her chest. "Heath, I know it's soon," he said quickly. "Too soon, probably. But I've never felt this way about anyone before, Winnie. When I found you that night on the prairie, it was like something was guiding me to you. And every day since then, I've just become more certain." "Certain of what?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. "That I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Winnie reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I think I'm falling in love with you too." Heath leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Winnie moved to meet him, and their lips came together in a gentle first kiss that quickly deepened with shared emotion. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I don't want to rush you," Heath said, his forehead resting against hers. "I know you came west for a fresh start, not necessarily to find a husband. Sometimes life has other plans than the ones we make," Winnie replied, her heart too full for pretense. "And I can't imagine a better new beginning than with you." Their courtship progressed rapidly after that day. Heath spoke with Robert Sawyer, formally asking permission to court Winnie, though it was clear to everyone that their attachment had already deepened beyond mere courtship. The couple spent every available moment together, getting to know each other's hopes, dreams, and fears. Winnie learned that beneath Heath's capable exterior lay a thoughtful, educated man who wrote poetry in a journal he kept hidden in his desk drawer. Heath discovered Winnie's passion for teaching and her dream of someday opening a proper school for the children of the area, who currently received only sporadic education when traveling teachers passed through. "You should do it," Heath encouraged one evening as they sat on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sunset. "The community needs a real school, and you're clearly born to teach." Winnie sighed wistfully. "Perhaps someday. But there's no building, no books, no supplies." "Those are just details," Heath insisted. "If it's what you really want, we'll find a way to make it happen." The casual "we" wasn't lost on Winnie, and she leaned her head against his shoulder, content with the direction their lives were taking. As summer progressed into early fall, Heath began construction on an addition to his ranch house, 2 rooms that would serve as a schoolroom and a library. He said nothing to Winnie about it, wanting to surprise her when the work was complete. One crisp September evening, Heath invited Winnie for dinner at the ranch. When she arrived, he met her outside, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I have something to show you," he said, taking her hand and leading her around to the back of the house where the new addition stood complete, its windows gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Winnie looked at him questioningly. "What is this?" "See for yourself." Heath opened the door, revealing a bright, airy room with several rows of simple desks and chairs, a larger desk at the front, and bookshelves lining one wall. Through an archway, she could see a smaller room filled with books and comfortable reading chairs. "Heath," Winnie breathed, stepping inside in wonder. "You built a school?" "For you," he confirmed, watching her face. "So you can teach, if you want to. The children from nearby farms could come here. It's central enough." Tears welled in Winnie's eyes as she turned to him. "This is the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given me." Heath reached for her hands, holding them in his own. "There's one more thing, Winnie." He took a deep breath, then lowered himself to one knee. From his pocket, he withdrew a small ring, a delicate band of gold with a single pearl nestled in the center. "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I know in my heart that you're the one I want to spend my life with. Will you marry me?" Winnie felt tears spill down her cheeks as joy filled her heart. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Heath, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to pull her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of his relief and happiness. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. "It was my mother's ring," Heath explained, touching the pearl gently. She always said she wanted it to go to the woman who would make this house a home again. I'll try to be worthy of it, Winnie promised, looking down at the ring that now symbolized their future together. You already are, Heath assured her, kissing her once more. They were married on a perfect October day, with the prairie dressed in its autumn finery. The ceremony was held outdoors, near the spring where Heath had first shown Winnie his secret garden. Jane had helped sew a simple but elegant wedding dress, and Robert proudly walked his cousin down the makeshift aisle between rows of chairs filled with neighbors and friends who had come to celebrate. Heath stood waiting for her, his expression one of stunned happiness as he watched his bride approach. When the preacher asked who gave this woman in marriage, Robert's voice rang out clear and strong. Her family does, with love and blessing. Their vows were personal and heartfelt, promises to love, honor, and cherish each other through all that life might bring. When they were pronounced husband and wife, Heath pulled Winnie into his arms and kissed her to the cheers and applause of their guests. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed an army, as everyone had contributed their specialties to the wedding feast. As the sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the prairie, Heath pulled his new wife aside. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwell?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. Winnie leaned against him, savoring the sound of her new name. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible. Even though you got lost gathering wood and had to be rescued by a dusty cowboy," Heath teased, referring to their first meeting. "Especially because of that," Winnie replied, turning in his arms to face him. "Sometimes being lost is the only way to find where you truly belong." Heath's expression grew serious as he looked down at her. "And you belong here, with me, on this land." "Yes," she agreed simply. "I do." Their guests departed as evening fell, leaving the newlyweds to begin their life together in the ranch house that was now their shared home. That night, as they lay together in the master bedroom, now adorned with Winnie's feminine touches, Heath pulled his wife close against his chest. "I used to lie here alone, listening to the wind and feeling like something was missing," he murmured against her hair. "Now I know what it was." "What?" Winnie asked drowsily, content in his arms. "You," he answered simply. "It was always you." The first year of their marriage brought both joys and challenges. Winnie opened her school that spring, starting with 8 students ranging in age from 5 to 15. Word spread quickly about the quality of her teaching, and by summer, her enrollment had doubled. Heath built more desks to accommodate the growing numbers, pride evident in his face as he watched his wife flourish in her role as teacher. The ranch prospered under their joint care. Winnie proved to be not just a schoolteacher but a capable rancher's wife as well, learning to manage the household accounts, tend a vegetable garden, and even help with calving when an extra pair of hands was needed. Heath, in turn, supported her educational efforts, sometimes sitting in the back of the classroom when his work allowed, listening to her teach with undisguised admiration. Their happiness seemed complete, but as their first anniversary approached, Winnie had a secret she was bursting to share. She waited for the perfect moment, which came on a quiet evening as they sat on their porch swing, watching the stars come out. "I have something for you," she said, placing Heath's hand gently on her still flat stomach. "An anniversary gift that won't arrive for about 7 more months." Heath stared at her for a moment, uncomprehending, then his eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Winnie, are you saying?" "We're going to have a baby," she confirmed, her eyes shining with happiness. The joy that spread across Heath's face was something Winnie knew she would remember all her days. He gathered her into his arms so carefully, as if she might break, then whooped with delight, lifting her and spinning her around before setting her gently back on her feet. "Easy there, cowboy," she laughed. "We've got a long way to go yet." "A baby," Heath repeated in wonder, placing his hand once more on her stomach. "Our child." He kissed her tenderly, then pulled back to look into her eyes. "I love you, Winnie Blackwell, more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, meaning it with all her heart. Their daughter, Elizabeth Jane Blackwell, was born the following spring, a healthy, strong-lunged baby with her father's dark hair and her mother's blue eyes. Heath proved to be a natural father, equally comfortable cradling his infant daughter and changing her diapers as he was breaking wild horses. He even built a special cradle that could be rocked with his foot while he read reports, or went over the ranch accounts. Winnie continued teaching, bringing little Elizabeth with her to school each day. The students adored the baby, and older girls would take turns holding her when she wasn't napping in her cradle in the corner of the classroom. It was an unconventional arrangement, but one that worked perfectly for their little family. As Elizabeth grew from baby to toddler, the Blackwell Ranch continued to prosper. Heath added more land to their holdings, expanding the herd and employing several hands to help manage the growing operation. Winnie's school became officially recognized by the Territorial Education Board, allowing her to obtain proper textbooks and supplies for her students. Their second child, a son they named James Robert, arrived 2 years after Elizabeth. With 2 young children and a growing school to manage, Winnie hired a young woman from town to help with household duties, allowing her to balance her roles as mother, teacher, and wife. On the 5th anniversary of the night Heath found Winnie lost on the prairie, he surprised her with a special gift, a delicate silver locket engraved with a compass rose. "So you'll never be lost again," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. "Though I have to admit, I'm grateful you wandered off that evening. If you hadn't, we might never have found each other." Winnie touched the locket, smiling at her husband. "I was thinking about that recently. How different our lives would be if you hadn't decided to ride out that night. What made you do it? You never really explained." Heath was quiet for a moment, considering her question. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "I was about to turn in for the night when I felt this urgency, like something was pulling me out there. I thought it might be a stray cow or maybe a predator near the herd. But looking back now, I think it was something more. Like fate," Winnie suggested. "Maybe," Heath agreed. "Or Providence. Whatever it was, I'm thankful for it every day." Winnie leaned in to kiss him softly. "So am I." Life on the prairie was never easy. There were droughts that threatened the crops, blizzards that endangered the cattle, and the usual hardships that came with frontier living. But through it all, Heath and Winnie faced each challenge together, their love growing stronger with each passing year. When Elizabeth was 8 and James 6, Winnie discovered she was expecting their 3rd child. The pregnancy was more difficult than her previous ones, and Heath worried constantly, insisting she cut back on her teaching duties and rest more. "I'm fine," Winnie assured him repeatedly, though the fatigue and discomfort were indeed greater this time. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Not my wife, not my baby," Heath replied stubbornly. "And I aim to take care of you both." In the end, it was Heath's vigilance that may have saved them. When Winnie went into labor a month early, he recognized that something was wrong immediately. The local midwife was summoned, but she soon sent for the doctor from town, concerned about Winnie's condition. The hours that followed were the longest of Heath's life as he paced outside their bedroom, listening to his wife's cries and the hushed, urgent voices of the doctor and midwife. When he was finally allowed in, he found Winnie pale and exhausted but smiling weakly, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. "Another daughter," she whispered as he knelt beside the bed. "She's small, but the doctor says she's strong." Heath gazed down at the infant, her face still red and wrinkled from birth, wispy blonde hair plastering her tiny head. "She's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like her mother." They named her Grace and despite her early arrival, she thrived under her family's loving care. Heath was particularly protective of his youngest daughter, carrying her with him around the ranch whenever possible, telling her stories about the land and animals as if she could understand every word. As the children grew, so did the community around them. The town expanded, with new businesses opening and more families settling in the area. Winnie's school eventually moved to a proper building in town, where she served as headmistress and lead teacher. Heath became a respected figure in the county, serving on various committees and helping to shape the development of the region. Their home remained the center of their world, though the place where they had built their life together from that fateful night when a lost young woman had been guided home by a cowboy with a lantern. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Heath surprised Winnie by replanting and expanding the wildflower garden by the spring where they had been married. He had collected seeds and specimens from all over the county, creating a riot of color and fragrance that took Winnie's breath away when he led her there, blindfolded, for a picnic celebration. "Oh, Heath," she gasped when she removed the blindfold. "It's magnificent." The spring bubbled merrily in the center of the garden, surrounded by every wildflower imaginable: bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, purple coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, and dozens more she couldn't name. A small bench had been placed beneath a newly planted redbud tree, offering a place to sit and enjoy the beauty. "Happy anniversary, my love," Heath said, drawing her close. At 50, he was still handsome, his dark hair now streaked with silver at the temples, laugh lines crinkling the corners of his eyes. 20 years since you made me the happiest man alive." Winnie, still beautiful at 42, leaned against him contentedly. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how fortunate we've been. 3 wonderful children, this beautiful land, a life full of love. And it all started because you got lost gathering wood," Heath reminded her with a chuckle. "And because you lit a lantern and found me," Winnie added, turning in his arms to face him. "My hero then and now." Heath kissed her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "I'd find you again and again, across any prairie, through any storm." "I know you would," Winnie replied, her heart as full of love for this man as it had been the day she realized she couldn't live without him. "That's why I've never been truly lost since the day I found you." As they sat together in their garden, watching the sun set over the prairie that had brought them together, Winnie reflected on the journey that had led her here. From a young woman seeking a new beginning after loss, to a wife, mother, and respected teacher, her life had unfolded in ways she could never have imagined that spring evening when she had ventured too far from home. The prairie had tested them over the years with its harsh winters, scorching summers, and unpredictable moods. But it had also rewarded their perseverance with breathtaking beauty, abundant harvests, and a sense of freedom that Winnie had never known in her city life. Most importantly, it had given her Heath steady, loving, and true, who had not only lit a lantern to guide her home that night, but had illuminated her entire life with his love ever since. "What are you thinking about?" Heath asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Winnie smiled, squeezing his hand. "Just how a wrong turn while gathering would turned out to be the best mistake I ever made." Heath laughed and pulled her closer. "Then here's to getting lost," he said, raising an imaginary toast. "And to being found," Winnie replied, leaning her head on his shoulder as they watched the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning and would continue to shine down on their love story for all the years to come.